What's up guys, JayzTwoCents here, and yeah, we may or may not be seeing new graphics cards in the near or not near future. And that's why this test bench exists. I built this test bench years ago and it has seen a lot of revisions and changes. But the only thing that really gets changed down here often is the graphics card, obviously. Now we've been running the 8700K on here pretty much ever since the 8th gen launched. And the reason why I've been doing that is because I've always heard and even preached myself that the more cores you add and the more threads you add, the less performance you actually get in games. They're somewhat negligible depending on the graphics card in the game and a lot of different variables. So that's admittedly why I've left the 8700K on here for so long, even though I used to run X299 and X99 on here forever. Actually, no, I never ran X299. But that's what we're gonna do today. I am preparing for the new launches by putting on my X299 Dark from EVGA, an amazing overclocking motherboard, extremely overbuilt VRM, and the reason for that is I'm finally taking my 7980XE out of the box, which I've never used for any project because this was such an unpractical CPU. So I figured, might as well test that theory. Are we going to lose performance by going from the 8700K to the 7980XE? That's why we're using this board, because the VRM can actually take it without exploding. But I just realized I probably have too small of a power supply now, but that's okay. MSI brings ultra-thin gaming to life with their new GS65 Stealth. The 4.9mm bezel, 144Hz 1080p panel, NVIDIA graphics, and 8th gen Intel CPUs make the new GS65 Stealth a true powerhouse with a small footprint. Find out more on how to pre-order by following the link in the description below. So I'm only going to be running two benchmarks here to give me sort of a baseline, because what tends to happen from one platform to the next, and especially when you're dealing with Intel to Intel, like Intel to AMD is obviously a whole different story, but we tend to see whatever happens in a couple of benchmarks kind of follows suit all the way through, with a few variables and exceptions. But it's also very important to point out a couple of things. One, we're not just switching to more cores, we're also switching to more memory channels. The mainstream CPUs on Intel only use dual channels, single or dual, whereas the X platform or the Extreme platform can use anywhere between 1, 2, 3, or 4 channels. So we are going to be setting this up in quad channel, giving us more memory bandwidth. We're going to be setting up obviously more memory because of that. This is going to be having 32 gigs versus 16 gigs over here. I don't think that's going to have a huge impact on things, but we could always pull out 2 sticks of RAM to compare that. And that's another video coming up where we're testing the 2018 version of does memory capacity matter with games. I did that back in like 2013, but things have obviously changed since then. So we're going to do our baseline test right here. This is Metro Last Light. I still really like this because it's definitely a good CPU or a GPU test. And what we're looking for here is bottlenecking with the CPU, or I hate that word. It's not really bottlenecking. We're just trying to get numbers to compare. Settings wise though, we are running 1920 by 1080. Quality is very high. Texture filtering is at 16x, motion blur normal, tessellation very high. The reason we're not running 4K right now is we want to see if at the higher frame rates that we're gonna get with 1080, obviously offloads a lot of that duty to the CPU to handle all those frames. We're gonna see whether or not we get a big difference there. We've tested into the ground what happens with 4K, where CPU is less important with 4K than GPU. That's why we won't be testing it today. If you wanna see the 4K results, then just add 4K to your search bar and you'll find something. So you can smell the FPS. Okay, so here's our result. We ran this test, what, 4 times? 4 times, and we were pretty much within plus or minus 2 or 3 FPS. Highest we saw was a 193, lowest was a 189.53 average frame rate. A couple things I want to talk about here real quick. One, the 8700K is running with sync all cores on the ASUS BIOS, which means it's not adding more frequency, but it is making all the cores run at the same frequency. It's a setting I always leave on. Number 2, I thought this seemed a little bit low, and I went and looked at my original 1080 Ti review, not of this exact card, the MSI card, and you could see in 1080 with the same settings we were getting 220 FPS. And then I looked at this video and realized I was running X99 at that time, but then I'm sitting here looking at trying to figure out what was running to maybe make me be losing approximately, what is that, about 10%? No, 15%, close to 15%, whatever the number is. Phil can annotate what the number was. But it dawned on me, we weren't dealing with the Spectre and Meltdown issue back then. And we have significantly seen a performance reduction in total max FPS at really high frame rates like this after Spectre and Meltdown was patched. Perfect example, Skunkworks is still running Windows 8 and a 6950X 10-core, 20-thread, and it is faster than my D-frame running a 7900X that's overclocked on water with two Titan XPs, little p's, which are faster GPUs than my regular Titan X Pascal cards on Skunkworks. Skunkworks beats it in all FPS testing, it beats it in 3D Mark, and it beats it in PC Mark, specifically because of the Spectre and Meltdown patching. So that just shows you how much power or how much FPS you actually lost with that. So these are our new baselines right now, at least for this test, 189.53, and we're gonna go ahead and run now Far Cry 5, use its synthetic, and see where that goes. The only thing we did with the GPU though, we didn't overclock it, we just allowed power limit to go higher so it wouldn't do any sort of throttling with power limitation, and then we upped the fan curve to make it a little bit more aggressive because we want consistent results. So yeah, apparently now we have to patch Far Cry 5. This is a whole, spend a week away and everything has to be updated. Far Cry 5 in ultra settings, 123 average FPS twice in a row. So I'm going with that number, 123. So now we've got to swap over stuff and do it again.
Why are you pulling the RAM out?
Because I'm shallow. I wanted to use the burnt RAM. I just can't do it. I can't do it. And I've got this beautiful set of white and black Corsair Dominator, which will just look so good on this test bench. Look at this. God, that's gonna look good. Moment of truth. Exception not handled. What? The 7980XE and all of its 18 cores and 36 threads of glory. Obviously, before we do our benchmarks of the GPU, I want to see what happens with our CPU, make sure everything's running fine, and just see all of these cores. Just look at that. Oh shit, I hit 84 instantly. 85, 86.
Uh-oh.
4,318 Cinebench score. Now, you know I can't help myself, and to keep things fair, I was running 4.7 sync all cores on the 8700K, which is as much as I wanted to push it with the water cooling and the temps we were seeing. So I've been playing around now for about an hour with my overclock to figure out where I want to dial it in, and this is where I've decided 4.5 gigahertz. It's actually doing it at 1.2 volts. Yeah, golden chip, probably bend. So now that I'm convinced that I am good and I'm stable, now we're going to go ahead and run the same benchmarks again. That's what all this was for, the benchmarks. Did I now skew results moving forward? This may seem an awful lot like the Does Core Count Affect Your Games video I did not that long ago, but that was just an 8700K where we had a 6-core, 12-thread, and I disabled cores and hyperthreading with the same chip. Now we're going from 6 cores to 18 cores with 36 threads, which is a significant gap there. And I forgot to turn on MSI Afterburner. Smell the FPS. But surprisingly, here's the thing, our average frame rate came up to 200.71. Here's what's interesting about that. We ended up raising, and the reason why MSI Afterburner is open right here is we raised our power limit to 120%. So we're allowing it to draw 20% more power, or TDP, than it's set to from NVIDIA's base. And we also set a higher fan curve. This is the exact same settings that I ran on the 8700K. What did not happen over there while running our Metro Last Light was we never saw the power limiter come on. Remember how it jumps up and down and says power, power, power? That tells you when you're hitting power limit. We saw that during this test. We saw we were hitting power limit, which tells us that it looks like we were potentially, I don't want to say bottlenecking. Bottlenecking is not the right term, but we were limiting the amount of FPS 8700 could handle while we sent a shit ton of FPS like this to it. So I'm going to run this test one more time because you can't just run a test one time and get your result. But I want to see if it does it again, if we start seeing power kick on. If it does, then we'll know that the CPU is actually allowing the graphics card to just run balls to the wall as hard as it possibly can. Power limit did not come on as much this time. Oh, there was once more, at least. We saw it a couple times. 200.4, another 200. So, okay, Metro Last Light, at least that title benefits from more cores. Now, going from 6 to 18, it's not exactly, I mean, we gained what, 1 FPS per, not even an FPS per core. So our last test here in Far Cry 5 with Ultra settings, we had consistent back-to-back runs of 123 FPS average. So our average FPS here was 129, an increase of 6. I don't know what percentage that is. Phil can put that up on the screen. But the reason why we're using Far Cry 5 is even the synthetic built-in benchmark is still using a lot more CPU than other synthetic benchmarks. So when we were running Metro, the CPU just sat at like 39C, 40C because it wasn't really doing anything. But you'll notice now the CPU temp has gone up significantly and the GPU usage drops down to more like 80, 85, and it will sometimes hit the 90s and come back down. Doesn't get as hot, which tells us the CPU is doing so much more. But because we're doing Far Cry 5, I feel like I should be talking like this. We're gonna do the test one more time here. We're gonna make sure the results are the same. We don't want to mislead folk down the wrong path saying, you know, definitively the CPU was actually what gave us our improvement here. But I digress, it's besides the point now. I'm expecting probably a pretty consistent result. But if you look at the temperature right here, it's certainly doing something with the CPU. All right, so that time we got 127 versus the 129. All right, so that time we got a 125 average. So we've gone down 2 every time, 129, 127, 125. But if you look, the maximum FPS is the same. Number of frames rendered is a little bit less on the second test, but our minimum FPS dropped from 99 to 95. What we think is actually happening here is that the GPU is getting warmer, and we're starting to see the GPU C states, or P states, actually called P states in GPU, starting to come down a little bit. So this one's probably not one that we can actually draw a conclusion from because, yeah. So this one really didn't show much of a difference. Yeah, 123 is still lower than 125. No one's going to notice this FPS anyway. So anyway, the whole point of this video, like I said, new test bench. I was curious of whether or not it's going to be causing myself a problem when we test the new graphics cards that are inevitably coming. I think I'm just going to roll with it. I'm fine. I mean, there's going to be plenty of people doing reviews on all sorts of platforms, and this is just another one to add to the mix. So guys, thanks for watching today's video. If you have any ideas for videos we should do in the future, make sure you hit us up on Twitter or just comment down below. And as always, guys, we will see you in the next one. I don't know.
Look amazed.